Now, if I asked you what motivates your employees, what motivates your colleagues, what motivates your leaders, would you have an answer for me? See, the funny thing is, motivation is so personal, and we don't always know what it is to motivate other people that are around us. But it is such a vital piece of information to make sure those relationships at work work. Because how you talk to one person to get them fired up on a project is not the same thing you may need to say to another to lead another project. Today's guest, he's going to motivate us to get better at this very thing and how to go about doing it. Hold on. I'm Russel Lolacher, host of this podcast, Relationships at Work. It's the guide for emerging leaders to create a workplace we love. And I'm glad you're joining me today because you know what? As someone who's had decades of experience in communications and leadership, it's really only gotten me more curious about how we can make the employee journey and our experiences along the way better. And I know you agree with me or you wouldn't be here listening as well. Today's show is a little different. For the first time, I'm bringing an old episode back. I'm shining it up, dusting it off, and representing it to you. It's a good one. And I think it's being repeated for a very good reason. I'm seeing posts a lot lately, especially on LinkedIn, where employee engagement, employee experience, leadership people are talking about employee motivation, but they're using such broad statements about we need to motivate our employees, ... and not much meat, not much substance. My guest, Will Mahon, that's not the problem here. He is amazing at sort of breaking up what motivates you, why it motivates you, the different types of motivation. Actually, when I first did this episode in early 2022, I did an exercise with my own team to better understand their motivations. And surprise, very different for each of them. And I knew that. I knew it. But actually having it down on a piece of paper and understanding the intricacies of what motivates them and why it motivates them, it really made me feel a lot more connected to them. And it certainly changed the way I communicated or tried to get them to maybe get themselves out of their regular routine, try something new, professional development. It really got me to a place where I could connect with them in a different way. Because truthfully, we can't talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging if we as leaders don't prioritize understanding the individual motivations of our teams, because that's diverse right there. Introverts, neurodivergents, generationally, single people, those in a family way, all have different motivations. So why don't we know them? There is such importance in knowing what makes our employees tick. And Will Mahon, my guest, does a great job of breaking it down, providing the different styles of motivation, and how we can go about digging into it all ourselves. So let's get over to Will. And with me, well, virtually, he's not in the room. That'd be creepy, I think, at this point. It's Will Mahon, and here's why he's awesome. He's a training nerd. I didn't come up with that. He freaking put it on his LinkedIn profile. What does that actually mean? Well, he's currently the senior training manager at Index Exchange and has been in training and people development roles since 2006, or at least that's as long as his LinkedIn profile goes back to. Could be earlier. I don't know. It's not documented. I love this quote that I read about him. It said, Will built and led a workshop with our team to improve awareness and appreciation of different motivations. That training led them to have daily conversations that they are then building off of. This is from a former colleague. So when people say nice things about how you train, that's swell. And here's what I love about LinkedIn is you can find things like, what are his influences? Oh, I looked. Yours are Jennifer Lopez, LeVar Burton, and Jessica Alba. That is in there. Of course, you've got about 20 or 30 that are a little bit more like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But when I saw Jennifer Lopez, LeVar Burton, I'm like, oh, yeah, reading Rainbow is his influence. I'm all over that. All over that. Welcome to the show, Will.
Thank you so much. I need an introduction like that everywhere I go. I'm pumped up.
I'm just like your audio hype man. You just walk around and I'll just be like, hey, he's awesome. Here he goes. He's entering the room.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Today, it's all about motivating employees. So here I am motivating you to talk to us about it. How's that? Look at that, me tying it in. Why don't we talk about first about the importance of motivating employees? Why is that important in an organization?
I think motivation and engagement, they're foundational to everything, right? Motivation drives a lot. It drives employee retention, it drives feedback. I think it's underestimated how much employee motivation and engagement actually drives business results and everything that goes into making business profitable. So that's my belief. I think really foundationally, every leader should put additional focus on motivation and engagement. That should be top priority for every leader. And everything else should be secondary to that. As an organization, how can I create an optimally motivating environment for every one of my employees? Because I'll tell you, Russell, what motivates you is likely very different than what motivates me, and is very different than what motivates the person who's listening to this podcast right now. Typically, it's easy to have a one size fits all approach to trying to drive motivation and engagement. Here's our mission, here's our values, here's who we are, get on board. And that's great. That works if you and I are motivated by the same thing. But if we're not motivated by the same thing, then there's an immediate disconnect. There's an immediate disconnect. I think we've all had those conversations where somebody tries to motivate us and it's just not resonating. You're like, I can feel it. It's falling on deaf ears, whether you're the person trying to do the motivating or the person on the receiving end. And you're like, you know what? I'm not buying what you're selling. Right. And so the idea is, how can I understand what motivates each person on my team if I'm a leader? And then what are the things that I can do to create an optimally motivating environment for each person on my team? And that looks and feels different. And it starts with there not being a one size fits all approach to how we engage with our people.
So, speaking of one size fits all,
Yeah.
there's somebody listening to this goes, but I pay them. That should be motivation enough. It's 1954 in their head. In that sense, what do you say to somebody like that?
That's part of it. There are people who come to work and are really driven by money, right? We all need a job. We all need to pay the bills. We all need to put food on the table, put the kids in school, things like that. That is not a motivation as much as it is a foundational need. So I think there's a really big difference between what I need to survive. It's perhaps a bit close-minded to think that there aren't 100 other people who can also pay me and pay my employees. So I think it's a bit of a difference between here's a foundational need versus here's what creates a really exciting, motivating environment where the people who come to work every day, who drive the business, excel, have fun, share the good word with their friends and colleagues on social media, or just having conversations with their friends, and who can really help to expand the business in terms of reputation, in terms of profit, in terms of how other people see it, in terms of better retention, which is cost savings in and of itself.
So, what are the ingredients to motivating an employee, whether you're
Yeah,
their leader or whether you're a fellow employee or a colleague?
yeah. All right, so I'm gonna give you a disclaimer. Here's my disclaimer. There are gonna be people who are listening who are gonna roll their eyes at what I'm about to say right now, but I stand by it. All right. I stand by it. Here's the part you might roll your eyes at. I heard this years ago. I heard this about 10 years ago. It's always stuck with me. Before her talk show ended, Oprah was asked, how do you engage with people? You were the queen of daytime television. You've built an empire. You've gone from a local newswoman to this billionaire that everybody knows. You've been on the air for 25 years. And you have the ability to connect with people in a way that others don't. How do you do it? And she said there are three things that every single one of my guests, whether you're a celebrity or whether you're somebody that nobody's ever met before, there are three things that you need. As the person who's leading this interview, if I'm a leader in a business, I need to know that you see me, I need to know that you hear me, and I need to know that when I speak, that what I say matters. I love that. So cue eye roll for half of your viewers, right?
Not at all. No, not at all. I think there's the human side of it is essential. it's not one sided. Anybody that's in any organization needs to feel like they matter and that they're a human being in that organization as opposed to a position on a wall. So, no, I think that resonates huge with a lot of people.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that too, Russell, is this is Oprah who interviewed, of course, celebrities, right? But a lot of people who aren't celebrities. And in those three pieces, none of those three items were about her. I need to know that my guest is seen, is heard, that they feel when they talk to me that what they say matters. So none of it was really about her. It was all about her guests and how she can create that environment where people would feel open, where people felt comfortable to have these engaging conversations and be vulnerable and be open and honest and have psychological safety. I think that's really true, and that led to her success. And I think a parallel can be made between what she did and does so successfully and how we interact with each other in the workplace, how we create that environment of trust and psychological safety with everybody that we interact with by following those same principles. And it starts with focusing on them versus on us.
So you have different types of people, and you've
Yeah.
definitely brought that up, that it's a personalization thing, because maybe money is my motivator, even though it is, baseline. Maybe it's to make a difference, whatever the hell that means, because it's different for everybody. There's another personalization thing. Are there different types of motivation for different types of people? Like, would you theme them differently?
Yeah, great question. I'm a big believer, and there's been research. I'm in addition to being a training nerd, I'm also a psychology nerd. There's a framework that was started over 100 years ago. Gentleman Edward Spranger, he's a German philosopher, did a lot of research. He determined that there are seven main types of motivators, and for some of us, they're positive motivators. For some of us, these can be demotivators. And so I'll share with you the seven here. First, power, right? I'm motivated, I'm driven by power, status, impact, control, influence. If I'm at work, I'm that person who wants to earn a promotion. I want more scope and responsibility. I perhaps want my responsibility to outweigh my job title. And that's pretty easy to spot. If I recognize somebody who is motivated by power, if I'm leading them, if I'm a colleague, there are really specific things that I can do: stretch assignments, competition, things like that, to create a motivating environment that they're going to thrive in. If I put this person in an environment where it's the status quo, they're going to flounder. They're going to be demotivated. The second one is it's called economic. Money, right? Economic means money, but really what it means is return on investment. And this is actually the most common motivator in the world. Of the seven, this has been determined to be the most common. And economic really says return on investment. If I give you my time, my energy, my effort, my talent, what do I get back? It can be money, right? It can be a paycheck. It can be a raise so I can get a bigger paycheck. It can also be things like a pat on the back, feedback, recognition, spotlight. What are the things, if I recognize that somebody's really driven by return on investment? By the way, a lot of salespeople are driven by this motivator because if I make X amount of cold calls, I'll book X amount of meetings, which means I'll get X amount of commission, right? So that's part of the reason why a lot of folks in sales are driven by this motivator, and they're driven to that career. So what are the things that I can do to make sure that the folks around me know that there's a return on investment? That their time, their energy, their efforts, they get something in return. It's that, like, what's in it for me mentality and approach. The third, which is also really, really common, is called theoretical. And this says, for me, it's important that I understand the facts, the data. I'm a problem solver. I want to discover the truth and learn, and continuous learning, even if it's something that I'm not going to apply immediately. It's important for me that I know as much as I can about the situation, my environment. And the more that I know, the better I can do, the better environment I can create for myself, the more facts and information I have. So those are the folks where I am not somebody, Russell, who is high in that motivator, right? I'm kind of a fill in the blanks kind of guy, but I know if I'm working with folks and if I can identify that they're really data centric, I've got to stretch myself. I've got to meet them in the middle so that they get what they need from their interactions with me, whether I'm their people leader, whether I'm a colleague, whether I'm a friend. How can I stretch my communication style so that they feel comfortable engaging with me? The next one is called regulatory, and it focuses on things like it's important to me that I have rules, processes, guidelines, structure, principles in place. And if I know that there's guardrails that I can work within, if there's rules that I can follow, then I'll feel comfortable. I'll feel like I can kind of stay in my swim lane. I can be really efficient. I can be really effective. Perhaps I don't do great with gray space. Maybe I'm less comfortable with experimentation, thinking outside the box. That might be demotivating to me. So how can I create an environment where there are structures, processes in place, standard operating procedures? I think you mentioned this at the top is altruism. So there's a lot of people who are driven by, I want to invest my time, my energy, my effort, my talents to help other people. And that can be like, there's a lot of folks in learning and development who are motivated by this, but there are also folks from all across the board. I've met folks who are C-level executives, and you might think they're influenced by power, and they say, no, I want to help people. I want to help people grow. People might misinterpret or assume that I'm motivated by power, but I want to help people. Salespeople, they're not always like driven by that ROI. Maybe I just want to help my clients, and this is how I do that. And so people will tell you that they're driven by like support and selflessness and compassion and generosity, altruistic motivations. That's something that spans a lot of different. We all want that in some way, right? But that spans all different fields of work. The desire to help other people. A lot of folks who are in creative fields are driven by aesthetics. So the aesthetic motivator is like creativity, design, but it's also like balance. I'm driven maybe like by work-life balance, if that's really something that's important to me. I'm super high in the aesthetic motivator. I manifest that by outside of work, I paint. So for me, it's fun because whatever I paint, whether it's good or bad, it's kind of the idea that it's never existed in the world before. And that's kind of fun and cool for me. I do yoga a lot. That's like super hippie aesthetic, right? But that's how I get those things that motivate me. At Index Exchange, I lead meditation with our employees. So that's like high aesthetic motivator. And it's not my job description, but it excites me and it motivates me. And so I try to motivate other people by the same thing. And then the last one is called individualistic, which was actually added later. It started in the 60s with like the hippie revolution, where, if you think 1950s prior, at least in the United States, individualism wasn't necessarily as commonplace as it is today. And nowadays there's more of a desire to be an influencer, right? To be independent, to have freedom, to be have autonomy, be unique, blaze my own trail. So this is a motivator that says, I'm really excited and driven to be my own person, go in my own direction, make my own path. And, I'm not as motivated by like rules, tradition, processes. I'm really more motivated by experimenting, thinking outside of the box. So everybody will be high and be positively driven by some of those motivators. And people will give you clues. If you listen, people will tell you. There'll also be things that you can pick up on that will give you indication as to what demotivates people. So if I can start to use that as a framework and say, all right, Russell, what are the things that motivate you? Why are you doing this podcast? Like what is your goal? And actually I'll ask you, I'll flip the table on you and ask you that. Why do you do this podcast? What's your motivation for this?
Pretty much power, Will. I mean, I don't see it being anything else but power. No, obviously not. I get it from the individual one, the one near the end, but
Yeah,
also the
individualistic.
service one. The service one has always fueled me, and I can certainly see of all seven that I touch on a few of them, i.e., compensation, financial. I don't want to be underpaid. I see that as a indication of my value, but it doesn't motivate me. So it's as I'm going through this and thinking it through, that there are touch points. They're all valuable in different ways to me, but motivating, like making me move to that next level, making me want to learn more, is that individualism where it's like, leave me alone, let me go, watch what I can do. And the other is, I just want to help people as much as I can. And this was very much the impetus of this podcast. Was I was talking to someone just today that I was at a conference, and it was about customer service, because that was definitely the realm that I lived in for a long time. And I was speaking on a panel, and it was down in San Francisco, all fancy and stuff. But every conversation I had when I brought up the employee experience, the glazed eyes, the oh yeah, that's important too, I guess. So that sort of stuck with me. And like, oh my god, there is such a realm of people that aren't being served, that aren't being highlighted, that aren't being motivated. So that's where this podcast came from, as a way of providing a platform for these conversations. So, thinking, you got me thinking.
And I just met you shortly before we started this podcast, and that came through for me loud and clear just in our conversation beforehand. I'm like, this is a guy who is his own person. He's a podcast titled "Relationships at Work." Right? What's more altruistic than that? Like having strong, important relationships at work. Here's the thing. Let's pretend we're in a work environment. We tend to try to motivate others in ways with which we're personally motivated. So if there are things that are exciting for me that get me up in the morning, just like you described, all of those motivators are important. Like there's a time and a place for all of them, but not every single one of them gets you out of bed. Not every single one of them gets you to say, all right, like let's do another episode of this podcast. But what you described are the two things that are really those driving forces. And so if I'm trying to motivate you and we're both motivated by those same things, the desire to help other people, the desire to like be our own person, experiment, think outside of the box, you and I are going to connect really quickly. We're going to hit the ground running, and we'll be likely a dynamic duo, especially in the workplace. If I'm motivated by things that you're not motivated by. So let's pretend I'm somebody who is driven by like processes, rules, guidelines, procedures. That's exciting to me, right? And so I might try to get other people excited by sharing that same mechanism. And when you and I are working together, I might understand you. I might recognize where you're coming from, but I'm not excited. I'm not motivated. I'm not going to come to work and say, this is where I want to be. This is the right place for me. And unless you as my counterpart can recognize that and then adapt and flex to me, I'm not going to be here very long because there are other environments that I feel like I can grow, thrive, be myself, be authentic in that are going to be different than what you're providing me here.
What I noticed of the seven, though, was it doesn't touch on things like extrovertism and introvertism and energy levels, because we're also very different on that level. How does motivation touch on those? Because you can look at those seven and it still doesn't really answer that puzzle.
Absolutely. One of my favorite TED Talks of all time. And so, training nerd, psychology nerd, TED Talk nerd, like big TED Talk nerd. One of my favorite TED Talks of all time is, Google it if you've never seen it, Susan Cain, The Power of Introverts. Susan Cain is a genius. Her TED Talk is one of the best I've ever seen. There's a lot of people who would make the assumption and say, and her TED Talk is about the story of her being a proud introvert. She shares a story about how even as a kid, she went to summer camp and they were trying to promote this environment of extroversion, camp cheers, camp activities. And she's like, I just came here to read books, maybe make some new friends low key. I didn't want to do camp cheers and things like that. And her entire TED Talk really focuses on her motivation for, she's really driven by that same individualistic motivator. Maybe, and it looks and feels differently than what you described, Russell. But if you were to take a transcript of her TED Talk and what you just shared, the words are very similar.
Hmm.
So she talks about how, while camp, and by the way, modern workplaces, open office spaces, things like that, promote extroversion and glorify extroversion, she said, no, I'm a proud introvert. Here's who I am. I'm not going to conform to this environment. And a lot of people don't equate or don't naturally make the connection that you can be introverted and also have this desire and motivation to like be yourself, have freedom, autonomy. You can. There might be people who might not think you can be a CEO and not be driven by power. You can. I've met them. I've talked to them. So I think part of it is taking a step back, perhaps thinking about any biases that you might have towards somebody's job level, department that they work in, their level of introversion and extroversion, because that actually doesn't dictate what motivates them. People will tell you what motivates them. But you've got to engage in those conversations. And by the way, like, you're not going to find out what motivates somebody by talking about the weather. So you've got to have a thoughtful conversation where people share with you something that's a bit more surface level. So you've got to dig a bit deeper to understand and recognize and identify what drives and excites people.
You're a learning nerd, so let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Are you How are you helping organizations or just even Index Exchange motivate varying degrees of personalities and different motivators to take learning opportunities? Looking at those 7 different motivators, what are some tangible tacticky things that you've done to connect those dots?
That is an excellent question. I think anybody who's worth their weight in learning and development will try to customize their approach to their audience. What I actively try to do, and even when I teach people, I try to incorporate all 7 of those motivators in everything I do. Because here's what's going to happen. There's going to be something that's going to resonate with you. There's going to be something that resonates with you. So let's pretend, all right, I'll just hypothetically, let's pretend I was talking to your listeners right now about why they should tune in and subscribe and listen to every episode of your podcast, right? I can say, you know what? Let's talk about power. This is going to be the best podcast for this topic out there, right? Here's the ROI. Here's that economic motivator. In the 30 minutes that you take out of your day to listen to this podcast, here's what you're going to get in return. You're going to get some insights, some tips, some practical application that's going to help you drive results at work and at home. Theoretical. We're going to have folks from all walks of life join this podcast. You're going to have information that you've never heard before, diverse folks who are experts in their field. You're going to get some really great information from a wide variety of people, right? This is designed to help you. Altruism. The more you know, when you know better, you do better, right? So we're going to help you have better relationships. This is designed to help you, the listener, be the best version of yourself and to drive positive relationships. Aesthetic, we have a creative approach, so we might take the topic of motivation, we might talk about it on a few different episodes in a few different ways. It's not going to be the same thing each time, so you'll have an individualistic, unique take to building relationships at work with every single episode. It won't be the same flavor every time you listen to a new episode. And what am I missing? Regulatory. There's guidelines, processes. We do the hard yards to make sure that we reach out to the right people, that we're talking about the right topics, that we're talking about things that are relevant to modern workplace. We do our research to make sure we're bringing in the right folks to share this information with you. So if I were to pare that down into something that was a bit more sophisticated, a 45-second approach, a commercial, something is going to resonate, right? Something is going to resonate with everybody where they go, maybe those first 3 points, I get it. But that 4th point, that resonated with me. I'm going to tune in. So I try to do that in the classroom, or nowadays the virtual classroom, is to take a topic and say, how can I approach this topic from as many lenses as possible, so that no matter who you are, there's going to be something that you're going to hang on to and say, yes, I get it. That resonates with me. And that's going to be the thing I'm going to take and run with. And so it increases my chances of making an impact. It increases the likelihood that if you're listening to me, something is going to stand out, and hopefully it'll reach a more diverse audience.
You're the hype man for this podcast. I love that.
Get there.
I'm writing that down. I'm using that in marketing. I'm using all that. Though you touch on something I was curious about when it comes to motivation. Now that you've moved out of the classroom face to face and in virtually, does the approach to motivation change at all?
I don't think so. I really don't. I think people, whether you're face to face or whether it's virtual, people are motivated intrinsically by the same things, right? So if I'm motivated by that ROI, my approach as a facilitator might change. What I do in the classroom versus the virtual classroom might change, but you still want and need the same thing. And so I don't think that changes. I don't think from that lens it's different. It might be a bit trickier to tell through a Zoom screen if people give you the physical nonverbal cues as to, like, when you have that light bulb moment. That's a bit harder to tell over Zoom than face to face. But beyond that, I really don't change too much in terms of my, like, casting a wide net approach.
What's the flip side of this? Where do leaders get it wrong when it comes to trying to motivate employees?
Yeah. Where people get it wrong, leaders and otherwise, because colleagues, I work with stakeholders who are, I'm not their supervisor, they're not my supervisor, but we're working on a project together, and let's be motivated. So I think when people are focused on themselves and what they want to say versus thinking about the other person and what they need to hear, that is sounds really simple. Perhaps I'm making it sound oversimplified, but if I'm focusing on myself, then I'm doing a disservice to the person opposite me. Russell, tell your viewers if I'm lying here. In our pre-interview here, you asked me one question, and I said, Russell, tell me what will make this most beneficial for you and your viewers. That was the only question I asked you. I said, if you tell me what I need to do, then I can help you and I can help your listeners. And so I really think that is a simple question, but I think it's something that people get wrong because we focus on ourselves versus the person opposite us. And it's hard to motivate somebody when I'm thinking about myself.
So, in a nutshell, you're a liar because you also asked if you could take your headset off and then
That's
ruin
true.
the audio for like 10 minutes that we were late recording. But
That
yes,
is
you did
true.
ask that question. So, what are the impacts you see when a leader gets it wrong, when it's more about what they want to say versus what their employees need to hear? What is the
Yeah.
impact to a culture? What is the impact to that engagement?
The impact is we sometimes forget. Sometimes you can get so head down in your company, in your workday, in your meetings, in all the projects you're working on, that sometimes you can forget that people have the opportunity to look up and look around, and there are more opportunities that are available to employees now more than ever. I'll tell you, this is a true story. Just yesterday, I interviewed somebody, and they said, I just want to let you know that I'm not going to work just anywhere. They said, I'm employed right now, and I'm not just going to work anywhere. And it stood out to me. They said, I'm going to wait until I find the right fit. Hopefully it's with you. I'm like, yeah, I hope it's with us also. But I respect the fact that, and this is happening more and more, where employees have much more power, much more bargaining power. I think we see that with just the job market. Employees have much more bargaining power than they've ever had, and they know that. And so, if you're not going to create the environment that's right for me, somebody else will. And the culture of work has changed. 70 years ago, it was, I'm the boss, do what I say, you need a paycheck, like you said at the beginning of this podcast. That is no longer an environment or a leadership style that flies in any industry. And so leaders have to adapt, and those who don't adapt fail. Their companies fail, those cultures fail, because those employees go elsewhere.
So you're left with an organization of people looking at the door if they're not feeling motivated. But also, if people are leaving, who are you left with? You're left with the ones that are happy not being motivated and happy just to, I guess I'll show up. Yeah. Like, what are you left with if not the motivated people that want to succeed, that want to move forward? So I'm guessing you either have to figure out the motivation thing or get stuck with an organization that might not be nearly as successful as the vision says and the mission statement on the wall.
It's a slippery slope. And I equate it to, you ever go on to, like, Yelp? Yelp, you will see 95% of what people put on Yelp is either 5 stars or 1 star. It's pretty rare that you find that 2 star, 3 star review, because either I'm going to take the time out to share my experience because it was amazing and you need to know how amazing it was, I want to shout it from the rooftops, or avoid at all costs. Right? 1 star. And by the way, if you ever look on Yelp, most of those 1 star reviews start with the sentence, I wish I could have given 0 stars. So that's with Yelp. And I've made lots of decisions where I've gone, oh, guess I'm not going to go to that restaurant. It's gotten poor reviews. And those 14 people who took the time to do a Yelp review have a lot of influence, and have personally influenced me over whether I'll dine with them or not. The same thing is true for Glassdoor, right? So those 1 star, those 5 star reviews, They go on Glassdoor. It is the equivalent. And folks are savvy enough to go on and say, there's a few one-star reviews here. I don't know if this is the place I even want to apply for. And if I do apply, I'm going to go in with this in the back of my mind that I'm going to be a bit skeptical about the leadership, the culture, whatever it is. So it's a slippery slope and it's a very quick snowball effect. If you don't catch it and if you don't catch it quick, a lack of motivation and engagement, especially if it's something that is stemming from leadership, can spiral out of control pretty quickly.
Whose responsibility is it to motivate employees? Because I've heard some leaders go, well, it's the staff's responsibility to motivate themselves, to know their career path, to know what their next rung in the ladder or jungle gym is. So whose motivation really is it?
Everybody, right? Everybody's got a stake. I'm spending what, air quotes, 40 hours a week in the workplace. I've got a responsibility to make sure that the place of employment that I choose is a good fit for me. It's important for me that I do my research, that I create those relationships, that I am a culture carrier, that I put in the hard yards to make this culture positive for me and the people around me. And it's also the company's responsibility. We all have a stake in the game. Relationships are a team sport. It's not an individual sport. It's something that we're all responsible for, and it's something that stems from conversation. you know if you're a leader, if you're listening and you have a manager who hasn't asked you the question, what motivates you, what gets you really excited, and how can I, as your immediate line manager, do more of that? How can I create those opportunities for you? I wouldn't say that their approach is wrong, but I would suggest that perhaps it's incomplete. And if they haven't engaged you in that conversation yet, then you do have a responsibility to say, I want to have a conversation with you. I want to tell you what motivates me. I want to find those ways to create an optimally motivating environment for myself. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about what we can do together as a partnership and get creative. I shared with you, like, I lead guided meditations at Index Exchange. That is not part of my job description. Nobody has asked me to do it. Do people benefit from it? Yeah, it adds to the culture. And I have a lot of fun while I do it. It is one of my top motivators. So it's one of those ways where I raised my hand and said, can I do this? This is going to be motivating for me. It will benefit other people. What do you say? And so regardless, if you're listening, there's something that hopefully resonated with everybody who's listening. They go, okay, yeah, I get it. I recognize that I'm motivated by this. I maybe that framework makes sense. If you're not getting what motivates you, think about what you can do. How can you lean into that more? How can you have those conversations so we all get more of what we want?
Where do you start? So, say as a leader, I want to motivate my team. I want to motivate an individual and I'm kind of curious as to how do you know you need to motivate somebody, but you're looking at them going, I want to look and see where I can push you in a particular direction. What are the first steps you take?
There's always a need to motivate people, even if you're motivated, right? It's important for us to say, how can I make sure that you remain motivated? Because just because you're motivated now, if I don't continue to flex that muscle with you, doesn't mean you're always going to be motivated. We've all met folks who were once motivated and kind of fell flat over time because that environment changed. So how can I maintain this motivation? So I think there's always an argument to address motivation and to lean into that, even with people who are eager, engaged, and very capable, high will, high skill. I think it starts with a bit of self awareness and self reflection, and I think the desire, this kind of an old cheesy trainer expression where I've said, I'd rather I can be right or I can learn something. So to have that approach where you can say, you know what, none of us are perfect, right? Let's engage in a conversation. I don't need to wait for like a manager survey data to come through to tell me if I'm doing a good job. You know what, if I'm talking to my people, if we're having these conversations, I already know what it's going to say, right? And so there are folks out there who say, all right, we've got an engagement survey coming up, let's see what the data says. No. Like, you should be having those conversations, you should be talking to people, you should know what that data is going to say before it comes through. Because if you don't, if you're surprised, you're not in touch with your people, which means you're probably not creating that environment in the first place. So it starts, so this succinct answer is, it starts with conversation. It starts with having these conversations, about what drives and excites. And by the way, having those conversations about what demotivates you, what are the things about your job? We've all got that thing where it's like, gosh, this is the one thing, it's a drag. I don't like doing this. I've got to do it. It's part of the job description. I believe none of us are totally well rounded. We're all kind of lumpy, but hopefully you have a team that's well rounded. So if there's something it bogs me down, maybe it lifts you up, Russell. So if we talk about those things, even the things that demotivate us, we can likely create a solution that's mutually beneficial for everybody.
Are there people that you just can't motivate? Does that
No,
situation ever occur? Or you can just look at the 7 and somebody's going to fall into one of those 7s?
I truly believe everybody can be motivated. Maybe it's just the optimist in me, right? But I say, look, there it's very unlikely that somebody joined a company and said, you know what, I'm going to apply to this company. Here's my resume. I'm not motivated. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to apply to this company. People, day one, we all had the butterfly moment, day one excitement, new company, new challenges. I think people start out motivated. We all start eager. That changes, depending on the work environment. But I think everybody, 99.9% of people start from an engaged and motivated place. We all want to do well. We all want to be successful. We all want to make an impact. And when people aren't, it's one of those things where, if you're a people leader, you've got to say, I don't know, it might be hard to tell, but like point your thumb before you point your finger. So like, let me point my thumb at myself before I point the finger at them. Why are they not motivated? Well, what am I doing? What's my role in this? What have I potentially done? What is the environment that I've created potentially done to cause this? And so I think just about anybody can be motivated.
Well, to be fair, if you're not finding out how to motivate your staff, you sure as shit are motivating them to leave.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Will. I really appreciate your insight on this. And I'm like, you really got my brain thinking about a bit about this and how I want to approach others going, which of the 7 dwarves of motivation are you? See, I'm already trying to brand it. I want to finish up with the last final 2 questions I ask of all my guests, and you would be no different. So let's start with the first one, which is, what's the best or worst employee experience you've ever had?
I'm going to go with best, optimist at heart. Best employee experience I've ever had is one that stood out for me. This was almost 20 years ago. 20 years ago, out of high school, I worked at the grocery store, the local grocery store, and I worked in the bakery. And I did like those weird overnight shifts, like 3 a.m. until 11 a.m. College, we all worked those weird jobs, right? And I'll never forget this. It was one of those like minimum wage jobs, a few bucks an hour, paid the bills, helped pay for school. And my supervisor, Amy, was her name. Amy, if you're listening, hi. she she wrangled everybody together first thing in the morning. It was like a Monday team meeting. There was only like 6 or 7 of us who worked in the bakery. And she said, our bakery department exceeded goal. And she goes, I got a bonus. And I'm going to give my bonus. I want to divide my bonus between all of you. She goes, because, you're the ones who like talk to the customers. You're the ones who like sold things. I'm managing the group, but you're really the ones who did this. And it wasn't like a huge amount of money, but it was one of those things where that didn't matter. It was really the principle where I went, wow, that is, I will do anything for you. I will literally do anything for you. And what better way to just feel valued than to have somebody say, this is your bonus. This isn't my bonus. And it stuck with me 20 years later. I've shared that story, and it was just one of those things that was very selfless and generous, and I will share that story many more times.
My heart got all fluttery. That was
All right.
so sweet. So sweet. Now, Will, what is one simple action that people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
All right. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, to sum up what I was just talking about with motivation, if before you try to motivate somebody, if you don't consider who they are and what their drivers might be, your approach is incomplete. There is room for improvement when it comes to motivation, when it comes to engagement, when it comes to relationship building. Take the time, have conversations with people. Talk about it. What gets you excited? What gets you what gets you demotivated? And before the next time you try to motivate somebody, big or small, take a step back, think about if you're motivated by the same things, and just try to tailor your approach. And it doesn't need to be seismic, but just little things here and there so that people will feel like you see them, you hear them, and what they say matters.
That'll do it. That's Will Mahon, everybody. He's a learning nerd, a psychology nerd, a yoga nerd, and dare I say, a relationships at work nerd, and a Jennifer Lopez influenced human being. Thank you so much for being on the show. Well, appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Russell.
And that is what I call done for another episode of Relationships at Work, the guide for emerging leaders to create a workplace we love. Thank you so much for joining. If you are a fan of the podcast, if you like what you just heard from Will and myself around motivation, I please ask that you go over to Apple, Spotify, wherever there is a place where you can leave a rating or review to really share what you feel about the podcast and my skills as a facilitator of said information in getting our brains a little bit bigger. Because, stuff like that from you, your giving nature of sharing that information actually really helps the podcast get seen, get noticed. And that'd be kind of nice, wouldn't it? Anyway, my name's Russel Lolacher, and thanks again for joining, and I'll see you next time. Bye.